So welcome guys. This is just a test trial about. This is first time free will, and free will is an illusion. We're gonna see if that's the case or not, really. And we have Professor Sapolsky here, Professor Robert Sapolsky, and we're gonna see one of his popular videos with Big Think, famous YouTube channel. And he says a few arguments that I think are interesting to realize that this is not the best arguments that you can use. This is just a test, live, just seeing whether people are here or not, to try to answer to this argument. We're going to check his arguments whether they work out or not. So let's begin. Okay, let's listen to this together. So just from the get-go, this is what he's going to say.
The frontal cortex is the part of your brain that is the freest from genetic influences because it's still being sculpted by environment and experience a quarter century after you plopped out there, whereas most of the rest of your brain is sculpted by 2 or 3 years worth of experience.
Great.
Whoa, we evolved, our genes evolved to free our frontal cortex from strict genetic determinant.
First of all, you see the wow, whoa, where our genes evolved to free ourselves from our genes. That's kind of what he said. So the frontal cortex is free of all the rest of the brain because we're not genetically equipped to that. Genetically, we evolved indifferent to that. So genetics has freed itself from itself. So that's a great argument. But you notice something else here. The talk about gene determinism is now off the tables. If you remember Dawkins, he's maybe championed even at this time. So whose word are you going to believe here? Is it Robert Sapolsky or Dawkins? It's really important to recognize that this is a shift of climate, even in science, and to try to use scientific arguments in these kind of a deeper type of questions. Superficial scientific arguments to these questions is a bit questionable, isn't it? This is test trial at the end of the day, but we're just trying to go with it together. Let's see what else he says. I think minute 2 is important because he's going to say now he's going to use an argument that he always does. I've seen him in many videos use this particular argument. So what is the argument? So let's listen together.
And in the aftermath, doing a lot of lecturing about it, and one of the themes that comes
You'll find out right now.
Is our behavior is the end product of what happened to us a second ago, a minute ago, an hour, a year, a decade, a lifetime, all of that. And I figured when I would lecture to audiences about this and take them through
this is significant.
They don't come away saying, oh, I get it, there's no free will whatsoever. And instead, there'd often be questions like, given all the stuff you were just telling us, it seems like there might be a little bit less free will than we all.
See, this is the argument he always uses in all the different types of videos I've seen of him. He always says, it's the result of the causal chain that happened way before this moment in time where you have where you make your choice. He's now kind of being rowdy a bit because people didn't understand him. They think that he means free will is kind of problematic, but he's saying no, it doesn't exist. This is one of the worst arguments to use, the causal chain, on many levels. One level is the argument from determinism, or the general abstraction of determinism. Look, anything that can be linked to another thing doesn't need to be caused at all. It could just be linked in a sense, just deterministically. Like if you have 2 sheep in a playing field, or Bob and Alice, they might be standing there because there's an abstract line you can draw there. They might be in cooperation playing a game. Could be. But could be not as well. So it goes both ways. It's like a correlation versus causation type of issue here. So just having things happening before what you choose to do, at the end of it, at the end of that line, doesn't actually call for causation or causal determinism as he would like to point it out. So let's continue. It's always this argument is going back, 1 second ago, is built upon what happened a minute ago, an hour ago, and so on. So let's continue with his arguments. I think
I
there's
realized, oh God,
I think there's a single point here that I should note at minute 3. Okay, let's see minute 3. Yeah. Sorry, this is just a test. So,
the book was way
seeing
too
how it's going to
subtle.
work
I had
out.
sort of
Yeah, there's one viewer, and I think maybe I know him, so I don't know who.
I just didn't realize
Thank you
it was
anyways.
this underwater.
So let's
Stressed
just
about your paper, just
sort of person who would have that intent at that point. And the answer is because of the biology over which you had no control.
Yeah.
Interacting with the environment over
Let's
which
listen
you
to
had
this
no
again.
control. There's free will. And
Yeah.
my whole point is that misses everything that's going on because you're not asking the only important question, which is how did you become the sort of person
How did you become
who
the
would
sort of
have that
person
intent
to
at
have that
point?
intent?
And the answer is because of the biology over which you had no control.
Because of the biology,
Interacting with the environment.
interacting with the environment.
No control.
Again, this is something that's actually different. This is not the story of materialism or naturalism, understanding how free will actually comes or lack of free will. Now we've entered the environment as a question. That wasn't the case until the 70s. I mean, even Dawkins, he always says the selfish gene, right? It's all about genetics, all about biology, really. But the sense that we have now the environment actually interacting with the being itself and affecting the being, so it's not just the genetics, it's also the environment, that's a new scientific claim. That wasn't there with the arguments before. And again, as I said, with Dawkins, you leave Dawkins in the rear window here, right? You shouldn't believe Dawkins anymore because he's all about the selfish gene biology thing. Now he's going to need to admit with the environmental aspect as well. He's going to have to admit that. But he's saying this as well, right? So let's continue, and I'm going to critique this as well.
Stretching from 1 second ago to the moment you were
A second ago
fertilized
to
egg.
being a
And when you look at
fertilized
how
egg.
that stuff works, there's not a crack anywhere in there in which you can insert sort of the everyday intuitive notion of free will.
So he's saying that, okay, since the moment ago and until you've been in the fertilized egg, there's not a single crack. Like, of course, I'm trying this is a test trial, so forgive me if things are not so neat. This is the first time. So until the fertilized egg, there's no crack in that system. Actually, no, there is. On 2 levels. Well, conceptually, there isn't. But scientifically, you cannot really claim that. You see, causation, like doing any study on causation, it's always in a sense of percentages and statistics. It's not really the fertilized egg that they're talking about here. So you can have fertilized eggs that don't have beings come out of them, or chickens, or whatever. You can have that. And now, does it go the other way around? Well, you can't say no. That's why it's always probabilistic. You really can't. You don't have this full universal statement. People only come from fertilized eggs. Maybe now we even have like newer technology, or even that's what transhumanists would want you to believe, that we're going to have a future where we don't need fertilized eggs. So it's not a necessity, right? And if it's an epistemic claim or scientific claim, then you can't make that claim really with a high degree of certainty. So he's saying there's no cracks. No, there are plenty of cracks. That's the first argument, which is more scientific or conceptually scientific. The second argument is, and it's problematic with this type of thinking, well, this is biology. And if I would agree with him on the biology aspect. But I do believe that he's a naturalist as well. And if you're a naturalist, you do take a position of reduction or reductionism. Right? So if you have physics and you have the theory of quantum mechanics in general, which is probabilistic in essence, then you can always go back and sit back on that quantum level, and it's never going to be probable, and it's never going to be certain or without cracks, as he says. Now, there are ways out of it, and there are arguments out of it, but it's still like you see the tone of certainty really falls off here. The question of reductionism in itself is a big one, and it's not, you don't just easily shrug it off. So again, relying on physics and nature, yeah, as human beings with fertilized eggs and sperms, but with physics, it's not the case, and you're going to have to build a very big case for that. So it's not really bulletproof, as he would like to think. Now, I want to say something. Let's just listen to this quickly, but then I'm going to say something later. I think there's a point. Maybe I'll mention it then. Minute 4. Okay, it's close.
One of the things that I think trips people up is just how much our language that we use to describe human action is just laden with meaning that feels like free will. I'm curious, how much time do you spend thinking about the language that you use to describe human action and human behaviors so that it can somewhat be divorced or separated from this idea of free will?
Where people sort of get into terminology troubles.
He's going to talk about language.
Is a difference between you can be a causal mechanism. I could pick up something and I've caused it to move upward in the air. I've caused every molecule in it to move upward.
Great.
It's the ability to be a causal agent, causality, the same thing as free will. No, I may choose to do this at this point, but that has nothing to do with the issue of how did I become the sort of person who would say that to you at this point, to do this with my right.
Okay, so this is problematic again. He says you can be a causal agent, right? You do have the ability to be a causal mechanism in his terms. Now, of course, just to be very nitpicky philosophically here, and it's not nitpicking, it's actually being precise. Causal mechanism is a particular theory of causation. It's not just general causation, but that aside, you can be like a causation. You do cause things to happen. So even lifting something with my hand, it will be affected by the shape of my hand and the power I can produce and stuff like that, sure. Now he's saying that has no relation to what happened before that made you lift that right hand versus that left hand. I'm sorry, I'm not looking for the camera. So lift that right hand versus that left hand. Something else happened, which was a cause to you again for this to happen. Now, this is something, and I even remember it from one of our scholars. It's called Ibn Qayyim. His name is Ibn Qayyim. And he mentioned this very obviously. Look, when things happen with certainty, like if A certainly causes B, there's no other way for that to happen, just like causation here, that doesn't mean it's not free. A wasn't free to cause B. No, it doesn't follow, right? Because you can have the other way around. It's almost like arguing from nothingness. It's arguing from the future. It's post hoc. It's like saying you can drink coffee, you can drink tea. The moment that you drink coffee, then you're drinking coffee. It just becomes a tautology, right? Well, why are you drinking coffee? Because I'm drinking coffee. And then somehow this result, which is drinking coffee instead of tea, becomes determinate about you being determined to drink that coffee. So it's the nothingness in the future that causes you to do the thing that you're doing. So there's no logical entailment between an unnecessary result of something and that being determined. It just doesn't follow. And that's a mistake that always happens. Now, by the way, as Muslims, we do agree to a particular understanding of causal determinism in a way. But again, this kind of clarification is important, and I think it should be important here. But then he takes it again to mean like, oh, but what about the things before that? Great, let it happen. That doesn't mean you're not free. Let it be entailed. Nothing's going to change. Great. That's still going to be entailed. And it doesn't mean you're not free. Okay.
Lift up at the same time, and people can.
Yeah. By the way, this is the same thing about determinism, as I said. Determinism can be abstract between, it could be correlation as well, right? So it doesn't necessarily need to be causation. Now he's putting causation with that correlation, but fine, it doesn't actually matter, as I just showed, as I have just shown. So let's continue.
Yeah.
Is there another
We
point?
make choices and we cause things to happen, and it splits in the road.
Yeah.
We even make decisions as to which thing.
So we make decisions?
Happen, this instead of that. But again, that's not an issue of demonstrating free will.
Now, this is where he's wrong. This is not an issue of demonstrating free will. Okay, what is free will then? I think this is an argument against what we have in our schools of thought that's like more of a libertarian, or our schools of thought would be called Mu'tazili understanding of free will, which in the case where you create your actions, right, and that's the only way you're free, is that you fully create from zero your actions. But then again, that notion of free will is unintelligible, just by fact of causation itself here. So why does he limit free will to that sense? So maybe he's closer to us on that statement. He's closer to us, but he then makes mistakes elsewhere. So let's continue.
For this interview, I watched the conversation that you had with Alex O'Connor of the wonderful Within Reason podcast. And
Okay.
in that conversation, you used this term, distributed causality,
Distributive
to
cause.
describe the multitude of things
Multitude of
that
things
lead
lead
up
up.
to a person performing an action or making a decision. And I really want to dig into that. What is distributed causality, and how does it influence the actions that humans perform or the decisions
This is
that
important.
humans make?
Not really.
Hey, big thinkers, we're going to return to the interview.
So add that.
For us to
I'm sorry for the ads.
what's that?
Hi, Tara. We brought you here to
Okay.
Of what your ancestors were up to a
Ancestors,
millennia
yeah.
ago. And they keep their even once that all of those things change the brain to do that.
I'm just gonna make it
You're
quicker
also
because I
asking
know
what
it's
the
boring.
these hormone
I'm
levels
guessing.
have to do with it. And you're asking, what does the plasticity of the brain in the previous months to decades, trauma, heartache, finding love, finding God, all of those things change the brain.
All the
And then
things that
before
change
you
the
know it,
brain.
you're asking, what do the person's adolescence and childhood and fetal life have to do with it? What do the genes have to do with it? And remarkably, you got to go even one step further back. What kind of culture were your ancestors inventing? Parentheses, in what sort of ecosystems? Because that had something to do with
Yeah.
it. Culture centuries ago.
Culture. Now, way up till the argument of culture. I'm gonna talk about culture as well. But before that, he was asked about the distributive causality, which is just the idea of many. The idea that many things can cause one thing, which is the case, by the way. You can have a tree, you can have a seed to grow a tree, that's for sure. But the seed doesn't alone grow the tree, right? It needs soil, it needs air, it needs sunlight, it needs many things. So that's called multiple causality. Now, to have a bigger word to call it distributive causality, it's weird. Now, he also takes it into history, right? He takes it into history as well. So says everything is, again, it's the same argument he always uses. Just repeating ourselves here. But then notice this culture argument then, because this one is important. So just let's do this.
Go even one step further
Yeah.
back. What kind of culture were your ancestors inventing? Parentheses, in what sort of ecosystems? Because that had something to do with it. Culture centuries ago, why is that relevant? Because your mother
why?
mothered you according to the ways in which she was raised in her culture, or translated a different way, your brain was being constructed at that point as a function.
So first of all, as a naturalist, talking about culture is weird. Like, I can understand the causal mechanism argument, because causal mechanism is about energy, just that particular theory. So, but I can understand the argument of causation as a natural cause, right? But then how do you understand culture? Because how women or your mother and father grew you up in that culture. So this abstract entity called culture is now a causal agent or causal force about you being what you are right now. It's conceptually true, right? But how does it work with you as a naturalist? I want to know that, right? Like, how does it work as a naturalist? It doesn't seem to make sense. Okay, culture. I'm sorry, look, it boils down to this, with good and the bad arguments. Everything that happened before is going to cause everything that happens later. Now, what happened before is all the different types of things. He doesn't stick to biology or physics even. He just says everything, even culture. And that's a big question, like, what his stance on consciousness? Because culture is made through consciousness. So is he a materialist, a reductivist, a limitivist of this idea of consciousness as just neurobiology in the brain? So it seems to be the case, but then how does culture, even if it's true, if it's an emergent property of some sort, how does it cause things to happen? These schools of thought, like himself, sir, doesn't believe that consciousness is its epiphenomena. It doesn't cause things like numbers, like math. They don't cause things. So it's fine, you know. This is the type of arguments. Now I've took you through a ride, and I'm sorry for that. It's just a test trial. and I hope you're doing well. Let's see you in other videos, and hit the like and subscribe, guys. Take care.